There are a couple of different solutions here. And the main idea is like where you put these brands in order to make sure that everything you've got is safe. So we definitely know that we need to put them on the function get user by ID and get post by ID. We need to make sure that the thing we're checking here is a user ID and is a post ID down here. Whoops, post ID. Now this is cool because it means that we can't like accidentally pass the wrong thing to the wrong thing here. And the other interesting thing is like this user ID here, which is a string, is being compared to something which is a user ID. So you can actually compare these branded types to non-branded types. Now, the question is whether you actually want to put these on the models themselves. So whether you want user to be a user ID and post to be a post ID. You notice that this does add a couple of errors down here, which means we would have to add this as a user ID and add this as post ID here. Now, this I think is probably the correct way to model it, because imagine if you had a post here and you wanted it to have a user ID, then you would probably want to represent this as a user ID itself. So you'd have to add it down here, user ID 1 as user ID. And I actually ran into this really hard when I was building a production application that had lots of different entities with several different ways that you could access those entities by ID. So there was a serializable version of the ID and a non-serializable version of the ID because we were saving it to local storage, but still had to have some sort of sense of uniqueness when we were not in local storage. I know, complicated. So having functions like get by serializable ID or get by unique ID, those were really interesting to have as different branded types because it meant that you couldn't accidentally access the wrong one. Which is why I included this, because it's a really incredibly useful pattern to know, especially if you have kind of complicated data structures that all rely on each other and you don't want to accidentally mess things up. Because now, of course, if we call it with the wrong thing, then we're going to get this really quite nice error here. So types of brand are incompatible, type post ID is not assignable to type user ID. You get really nice errors off this. So again, this is another application of branded types, and this should give you a good sense of what the trade-offs are, because when you have this database here and you're mocking this data, it's going to be quite annoying to have to add all of these as user IDs, as post IDs. So if you have a system with a lot of mocking, then maybe this isn't for you, but then again, you can just create a function which sort of creates these IDs for you. So yeah, this is a really useful application of brands for sure, and it's definitely something that I've run into in production before.